I don't know who it was when it was stated as the question that the candidates are against density, because I've been campaigning with these 5 other folks the last 3 months, and all I've heard is the same thing, that we are all for a balance, that we all believe that there should be pockets of density, that we're all against the sprawl, and we all are on the same page as far as wanting to protect our environment. We all love the natural resources around us. The only thing I would further add to that is that I'm a very strong proponent of the CDMP, the way that it was designed, and the projection for 25 years and then a projection for another 25 years. So as long as the plans that are brought forward stay within the UDB, as long as they stay within the proposed areas of greater density, then I'm all for it. If it's against those, then I would strongly look into why somebody has a good enough reason to say, let's change the plan.
Density is one of the issues that I've fought against a number of times, and maybe, Shelley, you were speaking about me, I don't know. We've opposed many projects in our neighborhood that we felt were too big. Now, this is what I've seen in my 20 years of fighting against overdevelopment. Our first battles were saying, don't build all those houses way out west where they don't belong. Then, when this notion of density came around, very vague word. Then the idea was, no, don't build that 40-story tower across from Dateland. And developers said, I swear in these meetings, but I thought we were supposed to do infill. Okay? If you go from a 1-story project to a 2-story building, you've doubled your density. And there's a big difference in terms of how people will feel about having a little apartment court built in their neighborhood that's 2 stories tall versus something that's 8 stories tall. I've worked for a long time with Liz Plater-Zyberg, who is a genius. She's a great lady and an internationally respected town planner, who says we have missed the ability to build those apartment courts. And if you go on Miami Beach and you go on some of the avenues a little bit to the west, you'll see that there is a mix of very nice houses and apartment courts, and they all kind of work together because they're all in scale with one another. But what we have is a situation where you either build too wide or too big because everything is set up to build the big project, which makes a lot of money for the developer. To share one line. A developer was asked, why don't you build a 30-story building right now instead of a 90-story building? His answer, it's just as easy to build 90 stories.
Okay, some follow-ups.
And not directed at you, Albert, but in looking at these things, and as sitting as someone who's done the zoning and has created a comprehensive development master plan and led meetings and tried to work out these issues in a municipality, you know, one of the fears I have, I live in Kendall, can you imagine if we just had everybody double their density in their single-family home area in Kendall? I mean, it's bad enough out there now. And that's why when you think of density, you have to think of an overall policy, and you have to put it somewhere where people don't have to use their cars. And it needs to follow along things like the transit corridor, because I think the whole theme of tonight, and you know, talking, Danny, I think a lot of the things you've been talking about is we're all in line on a lot of things. We all love the environment. We're trying to create something sustainable. But, you know, our personal preferences may not gel with what needs, the hard decisions that need to be done. And we've all got to work together in regards to the education and redoing things, whether it's energy or density. But you just can't go out and double neighborhoods, because the neighborhoods now, especially when you go to the neighborhood schools, when you think about the crunch time that's there, it's horrible. So it needs to be a whole different policy. It needs to be actual density. It needs to be done in a way where you encourage mass transit, getting people out of their cars, and that's why you've got to go vertical in a lot of areas, and you have to accept that.
Well, when we talk about density, when we talk about the problem of density or too much density, I'm going to readily admit, and I was wondering too when the question came up, well, you have to have a balance in your community, and your community should always be master planned, whether you're a city, a town, a village, whatever. You should have a master plan for your city to decide where the higher density projects go, where the lower density projects go. But here's what would always happen. And I have to say, I see Gail Sirota in the audience, and she was the city attorney of Homestead, and so I did fight a lot of the density projects. And we actually reduced density twice. We reduced the maximum density twice. Because what was happening, there's a little clever attempt by developers to do density averaging. And if you know what density averaging is, you have a 60-acre PUD, which is a planned unit development. You have a 60-acre. So we say, oh, we're going to allow in this 60-acre PUD 10 houses per acre. So what happens is it's an average because you carve out for the roads and you carve out for the little parks and you carve out here. So you end up with actually 14 houses to the acre instead of the 10. So be careful of density averaging. Make sure it's properly master planned. Use urban design guidelines properly in the proper places and you won't have the problem. Proper
Okay.
density and proper. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else want to follow up on this? 1 minute, please.
At the end of the day, for the regular person in the regular neighborhood, it comes down to just making sure that you're heard and that you have an opportunity to have your voice heard. I mean, from my experience, and I know at the opening I gave that, I was sued by a developer, Michael Baumann. And I can tell you from my experience, all I can say is I think everybody's opinion on either side needs to be heard. And you need to be given the opportunity to talk and see what the traffic studies are, how it's going to affect your neighborhood, and you certainly don't need developers giving you slap suits just because they have a lot of money.
And I think the issue is that, yes, folks can get hurt, but the decisions over and over end up going towards the money. And it addresses our situation here on this race and every commission race right now going on. Developers do get a chance to buy a vote, to buy a race. And what we find is that in our situation in Kendall, we end up losing not because we don't go ahead and let folks know how we feel. We do. Not because we're not articulate enough, because we are. Not even because we're not reasonable enough to allow a certain amount of density, but because we're the neighbors and we're not the developers. And this is the way it's been for 90 years. This was what I said at the very start. We have to break that habit. We have a boom and bust cycle, which is for us a binge and purge cycle. We're addicted to development in a way that's simply not healthy for our community. Yes, in downtown Kendall, that's the place where we were trying to up the density. We said, well, you know what? If you make those buildings 3 and 4 stories, that'd be pretty nice. They ended up a lot taller than that, and it's mostly empty right now.
All right.
Is the county trying to save money with air conditioning?
Bill Warren?
Yeah.
I go back, but they can't, they don't have any abilities.
I know we're in a budget crunch, but.
It's 8:25. We have to start clearing out about 8:40. Is that right? So about 15 more minutes.
Well, we have to be out at 9, we close at 9.
So we'll go longer and just leave quickly.
Why not take your jackets off?
Take your jackets off. That's it. This question's from Janet Novotny. How will you overcome the negative voting of the majority of the commissioners on issues related to the environment versus the greed of developers? Is there anybody who didn't go first? No, you definitely. I want you to take a crack.
They don't vote in a way that would make their parents proud. They don't vote in a way that is of good conscience for us. And it's to be able to change a mindset by leading by example of goodness and respect. They don't respect one another. They don't respect the people that come before them to ask of things. So I would lead by example and try and be able to put some goodness, and again, I don't want to make a big to-do about it, but godliness about it as well. Because I don't think that they're answering to the goodwill of everybody else.